My name is Bill Swantner. I'm a certified Master Gardener in the state of Texas. My membership is with the Bexar County Master Gardeners Association, and we'd like to welcome you to our YouTube series, All Things Gardening. Gardening in South Texas can be a real challenge. It can be 100 degrees in February, it can be 110 degrees in September. How does a homeowner have a yard full of color when we have temperatures like that throughout the year? Part of the answer is Texas superstars like this Henry Dolberg salvia. In this presentation, Master Gardener Lynn Cox will give us a presentation on Texas superstar plants.
Good morning, and my name is Lynn Cox, and I'm a certified Master Gardener. Been one for 18 years. What makes a Master Gardener special is the training that we receive through Texas A&M's AgriLife Extension Service. They train us in order to provide you with good, unbiased, research-based, locally relevant gardening information. So what does that mean? Unbiased. That means I am not going to tell you what to do. When you come to us for questions or you come to us for information, what we're going to do is provide you with all the information in that area. We're going to provide you with all the alternatives that you have, and then let you, the gardener, choose what's right for you, your family, and your garden based on what you want out of the garden. So we're not going to tell you, you must be organic, or you must use this pesticide, or you must plant this plant. We're going to give you that information. And that information is going to be research-based. So you don't get anecdotal kinds of solutions to problems. A lot of home remedies are passed around from gardener to gardener. And the reason that we don't do that is because really the products that are tested have been tested for effectiveness on the problem that you're addressing, as well as safety for you, and safety for that plant that you're applying it on. If you're taking home ingredients, you're really just rolling the dice. You may have a product, a combination that you come up with that won't hurt your plants, that won't hurt you, and that will be effective. But what if somebody changes the ingredients of those home products that you're putting together? It may no longer be safe for your plants, for you, or effective against the insect. And so you'll hear us giving you research-based solutions for those kind of problems. Also, when it comes to plants, we do research on those so that when we recommend a plant, we know it's going to survive in this part of the country, which brings me to the third aspect. We're going to provide you with locally relevant information, because I'm sure you realize that gardening here in Bexar County is a whole lot different than gardening in El Paso or Dallas, much less up in the Midwest or the East Coast or the West Coast. And so that information we give you is going to be pertinent to you right here in Bexar County. So today we're going to be talking about the bigger picture. We're going to be talking about Texas superstars, but I want to fit it into the bigger picture, and that is water conservation. We are not currently in a drought, and yet every drop still counts. We have a population that's over 1 million and growing. It's approaching 2 million at this point. By 2050, they're expecting us to 50% more, about a 3 million population with the current water that we have. And so we need to find other ways to conserve. The best place for conservation is going to be for us in our yards. Right now, the average homeowner in Bexar County that is a SAWS customer, because that's where this data is coming from, spends 50% of the water they consume on their landscape. That means 50% of that water bill that you pay is just keeping your landscape alive. If you even average it out over a whole year, you're usually spending about 25% of that water, keeping your landscape alive. And so one of the things that we do is we give you some good principles, some good techniques that can allow you to still garden, still have gorgeous gardens, because we're not giving those up, but you're going to do it on less water. Principles like incorporating compost and mulching as part of your regular gardening practices, and finding the right plants that are well adapted for our area. And that's what brings us to the Texas Superstars. So what we're going to cover today is, so what is a Texas Superstar? What makes it have that designation of Texas Superstar? And what does that mean for you, the home gardener? And then we're going to take a little short look at why you should consider doing the majority of your planting in the fall rather than the spring, the advantages of that. And then we're going to go through a wide array of Texas Superstar plants. There are over 80 in the group right now, with more coming on every year. And so I can't cover all of them. And so what I did is I selected ones that I think bring outstanding color in your fall garden, or that we really strongly recommend planting in the fall so that it's ready to go in the spring. So any questions before we get started? All right. So one of the questions we get a lot as a master gardener is, what plant should I plant, fill in the blank, in the sun, in the shade, in the dry, in the wet, to provide screening, to give me color in this season? All those questions come up. And we also get a lot of homeowners that they're either new to gardening, or they're new to San Antonio and the gardening here, and they're looking for recommendations for plants that will work for them here. And so, again, research-based answers. There is a collaboration between the AgriLife Extension Research, AgriLife Extension Service, and Texas Tech University, and they field trial a lot of plants. The majority of them right now are landscape plants, but they're also trialing vegetables, herbs, things like that. So you'll see increased numbers of those as we move forward in the program. When a plant goes into trial, it's given minimal soil prep. Basically, they're loosening up that soil. They are going to give it reasonable water over the 2 or more years that it stays in trial, and they will use no pesticides. And then they go out on a periodic basis and they do evaluations. Only those plants who are giving outstanding performances in the field trials, in color, in production, in growth, in beauty, are selected. The other criteria that they have to have is they have to be easy to propagate. And the reason this is important is, for you, that means that if it survives under the conditions that it survives in the field trials, it's going to be a really outstanding performer for you in the home garden, where we kind of give it a little more tender care, maybe a little more water during some of our heat stress times, maybe a little extra fertilizer, because you'll notice that wasn't one of the things listed. So these Texas Superstars are going to be super in your landscape. The other thing is, if they're easy to propagate, that means you're going to find them in the market. If they're easy to propagate, then the growers can do them in numbers sufficient to supply nurseries, so when you go to the store, you can actually find them. It's very frustrating to find out that there's this great plant and you look all over and nobody has it. And so Texas Superstars, by being easy to propagate, should be able to be supplied in sufficient numbers that you can find them, and find them at reasonable prices. So one of the things that you're going to hear me say a lot is, once established. These plants are drought tolerant once established. This plant is heat tolerant once established. And the reason for that is, how many of you have heard the gardening phrase, first year a plant sleeps, second year it creeps, third year it leaps? Any of you familiar with that? some of you. So this is talking about what is going on with a plant's growth in that early part of its life. A lot of people think, okay, if I put it in the ground, I plant that tree, shrub, perennial, give it a little drink of water, it's going to act just like all the other plants in my garden. Or they think maybe it's just a week or two, and then it's going to act just like all the mature plants in my garden. And so they suddenly have problems with those newly planted plants. It's not the plant's fault, it's our fault. Remember, a gardener provides tending to the plants. A plant can't get up and move to a better location. When we put it in a spot, that's where it gets to live. And so it is our tending, our supplying what they need that allows them to grow and thrive in an area. If we get one that's well adapted, we won't have to do as much to help it grow in that spot. But we do need to give it a little extra care in getting it started in its life in our garden. Fall's great for planting because the temperatures are cooling. I know this is September. I know we think this is supposed to be fall, but actually fall occurs later in the month. We're still in what's known as summer. Go outside if you're not sure. This is still summer, But by planting, say, in mid-September going into October, the temperatures are cooling down. It's still warm. The soil is still warm. And in that first year, when we say the plants are sleeping, we refer to the fact that there's not a lot of growth going on above ground, but there's a lot going on underground. At that point in time, the plant is trying to establish a really strong root system. The structural roots, the feeder roots, and so most of the energy is going on in the development of that. Without those roots to take up nutrients and water, the plant can't put on new foliage. So it's growing down below, and the foliage looks like it's not really doing anything. It's just kind of sitting there, but it is doing what it needs to do. During that first year, you may need to provide additional supplemental water. And let me define that. We all have our regular watering patterns. We may use drip, we may use spray irrigation, we may hand water, but we're providing. When I say supplemental water, I'm talking about additional water above that. So you may have a bunch of salvia, you tuck in a new one. That one plant, you may find that you need to give a little supplemental water. He may wilt easier or faster, and that's because he doesn't have as big of a root system underground yet. And so extra care may be needed the first year, particularly trees and large shrubs. You'll find that. Trees that are brand new to your garden, you may already see signs of they're dropping their leaves right now because they didn't have a sufficient root system to help support that top growth, and so a tree sheds those extra leaves. Give them a good, deep drink of water so that they have that to draw on and make sure it's in that root system. We call it drip lines, so where a plant's foliage comes out to, that's generally underground. That's where their roots are coming out to. So watering the trunk doesn't necessarily get it done. You want to water that whole area under the leaves of that tree or large shrub. Second year, this is the year they creep. So last year, you kind of babied them, you kept an eye on them, you provided supplemental water when you realized they needed it, and now you're into the second summer. So for a lot of your smaller perennials and stuff, they may be good to go at that time. They may have a sufficient root system for what they have, but they're continuing to grow. They're continuing to put more roots down. Those bigger root systems are pushing up more growth, which then photosynthesizes, takes that energy back down to the roots, which then grow and take up more nutrients, which allow more foliage growth, and you get that cycle. So in that second year, you're seeing some growth. It may not be spectacular, but you're seeing some growth. By the third year, that's when we say most plants leap. That means by that third year, they've developed a really good, strong root system. And so when that spring push for growth comes, you get a really good growth. So for example, I put a Hamelia in my yard. We'll talk about those plants later. They're a great one. It was a little 1-gallon start, and the first year he kind of sat about that big. He wasn't very big. Second year he was a good, I'd say 2.5 foot by 2.5 foot, maybe edging towards 3 feet. This year he is, he's 4 feet tall and wide, solid, gorgeous. He definitely slept, crept, and then leapt. Now, does that mean if you put a plant in and the first year it goes gangbusters, it's going to die? No. That just means that plant's better at multitasking than some of the other plants. But a lot of plants you'll find do that sleep, creep, and leap. So don't give up on it. Just give it a chance to get established, and then it will handle itself better in your soil under your normal watering patterns. Oh, I'm sorry. So her question for the crepe myrtle is, when the landscaper put it in the ground, they made this little berm around, a little saucer that you would then water in there. And it's not as big as the leaves that are above it. But what size was the pot that they took that plant out of? That's all the roots it had. So by putting that berm right there and you watering within that, that's saying, don't run off water. I need all of you to go down into that root system. So for the first year, you are watering there. Maybe by the end of the summer you would be watering a little bigger, but by next year you should be watering completely under the foliage, because those trees are going to spend the summer spreading their roots and growing, and so that little berm won't be sufficient.
But it's starting to drop some leaves. So.
It is, because it's under stress. Planting something in temperatures above the mid-80s is hard on them. It's just hard. And so don't worry if you get an early leaf drop. Keep the plant watered well, let it grow more leaves, and then when it flushes back out, it will not struggle as much next year. And that's why fall planting can be a real bonus. If you're planting in the fall and the temperatures are cooling down, there's not as much heat stress on those brand new plants. They have 4 to 6 months to increase that root growth before they have to face a spring push out, and definitely 6 months or more before they have to face our first Texas summer. And so you will have less stress on those plants than if you planted them first thing in the spring, and you know how long our spring lasts. There it went, if we're lucky, maybe on a weekend. And then we're into summer. And so those plants that we put in the spring, particularly later spring, can often really struggle that first summer. And it's just because they don't have enough root system to take up the moisture to give you a good growth and to survive themselves. And so we end up babying them a lot, spending a lot more water on them in order to keep them in the movement to becoming established in our yard. So consider planting now, especially trees, shrubs, things like that.
Well, and I was at a nursery just last weekend, and they were telling me that if you plant in the fall like a tree, they haven't sized them up yet, so you're getting the biggest tree for that dollar amount.
Yes, you are. Over winter. So she was pointing out in the nursery, another is the value you get. So they're going to take those 1-gallon plants and they're going to bump them up over the winter to the next size up. So you will pay more for that same plant in the spring than you would if you took it now and got it in the ground. They bump up their stock because they don't want them to become root bound. So if they didn't sell them, then they are going to upsize them, and you're going to pay for that larger, even though the root system really is practically the same. So good value. Okay, let's look at some of these Texas Superstars. You have a brochure. There's a lot of information. Like I said, there's over 80 of them already established as Texas Superstars. There is a handout inserted. That's this year's Texas Superstar editions that are not in the brochure. Next year we have 4 or 5 more in the pipeline to come out. So check with superstars.com frequently to see what the new plants are that are coming out. Let's look at some trees. If I were to recommend one shade tree to you, it would be the lacy oak. This tree has some fabulous characteristics, one of which is it's a Texas native. So it is going to be well adapted for us. And it does very well here in the Bexar County area. I like it because it has so many different seasons of interest. In the spring, when the leaves push out, they have a soft pink color to them that then matures into a green with a slight bluish undertone. Very pretty color, very pretty color. In the fall, they've got the acorns of interest or not, depending on how you view acorns in your landscape. And then depending on the climate that we have in the fall, you may get some yellow color, or it may simply turn brown, go from tan to brown and drop before it drops for the winter. It's got very interesting looking bark. That lacy tone comes from the lace look to the bark of it, so there's winter interest there. It's seldom bothered by disease and pests, so those aren't issues. It is drought tolerant and heat tolerant once established. Yes. And you can grow it in full sun, but it will handle light afternoon shade. For winter color, for fall and winter interest in your garden, the Possum Holly, which gets to be about 12 feet tall, so you can train it like a small tree, treat it like a large shrub. In the spring, it puts on its leaves. Right now, mine is full of little berries, little green berries, that later, as we move into fall, will turn bright orangey red. With the leaves drop, then these berries really show, and they'll persist until the birds come in and clean them out. You'll have flocks of the cedar waxwings, the robins and stuff, and once they find these, they will return to that tree on a regular basis until it is stripped. So you don't have to worry about old dried up berries hanging on this plant. It's not going to happen. The wildlife love it. The songbirds, as they migrate through, will also take advantage of it. The thing is, it only berries on the female plant, so you have to have a male. But the nice thing is, hollies aren't really discriminate. Any holly will do, So you can have Burford hollies, you can have Yaupon hollies, the dwarf Yaupon hollies, any in that holly family. If you've got those in your landscape or your neighbors have them in their landscape, you should have sufficient pollination to have the females berry. There's a variety called, I just lost it, Warner's Red, that is particularly good for providing berries and having itself propagated.
No, it's a female.
You buy it in the fall. You buy it and plant it now. So you go to the nursery, if it doesn't have those little green berries on it, you don't trust it. So this one, good question. How do you know if it's a female? You go to the nurseries now and you find them with the green berries on them. That is the only way you're going to be 100% sure. Trust me. I had a landscaper talk me into one. They only carry females because everybody wants the berries. I've got a male. And he's big and proud now. But I also have some females. So, I got it. But
So the Warner's Red is a type of this?
So the Warner's Red is a variety. You'll see Possum Holly and then quotes Warner's Red. And it's a particularly good one.
If you just buy the female, you'll have berries this season, but will you have berries next season if you don't have males?
No, not if you don't have males.
So you, regardless, you're going to have two.
Unless you have some of these other types of hollies in your landscape. If you've got Burford hollies, Yaupon hollies, dwarf Yaupon hollies, a lot of those are going to be male because they don't necessarily buy and propagate those for the berry. They're doing it for the shrub itself. Where on a possum haw, you are looking for that ornamental value. So go now, buy now, and go ahead and get it established this fall. Lynn's Legacy is a type of Senseo, also known as the Texas Purple Sage. Right now, we've had a rain, they're in bloom. This is the one plant that I cannot find in the nurseries. So if anybody finds it, I want to know. The Lynn's Legacy blooms more profusely and more frequently. It's not quite as tied to the rains, to the barometric pressures, and so it'll bloom a little more frequently. Any kind of Senseo, though, is going to make a good addition to your garden. Most varieties come in a gray-green leaf. There is a variety called Green Cloud that has more green than gray in its leaf. They have these wonderful purple blooms to them, kind of a lavender in most cases. And they come in the different varieties will come in different sizes. So make sure you know how big that's going to get and put it in the right plant in your right place in your garden. For Senseos, they are full sun. It's a Texas native, so it grows naturally in our rocky soils. So it will grow in a wide variety of soils as long as you have good drainage. They don't like wet feet. Good drainage. Don't overwater those. Princess Carolyne is a variety of Napier grass that has proven to be really super easy to grow, disease and pest resistant. It's an ornamental grass that gets to be about 4 feet tall and wide, so it makes a big presence. What I love about this is that it is purple. If every plant in our garden is green, then it suddenly just kind of all runs together. So if you intersperse with gray greens, or purples or something, you get a much more dramatic and dynamic looking garden. So this is a really good plant to use, but make sure that you have a 4x4 space to put it in. It's not a tiny ornamental grass. Caution on over-fertilization of this. It will cause good growth, but it will turn green with heavy nitrogen. As long as that nitrogen is in the soil, so no, but. So it's not a permanent condition, she asked, but it will turn it green until that nitrogen level falls back down. This is brand new for this year. This one was announced just last month in August. Linnheimer Muley. I've grown this for quite a while, and it's a native here. What I really like about it is not only is it native, well adapted, heat tolerant, all those great conditions, is that it also has so many different uses in a garden. You can use it kind of as a backdrop for like annuals in the front. It gives that soft look to it. You can use clumps or groups of them where you need erosion control. They have a nice matting root system that really holds the soil. It is great for softening hardscapes. So around here, you can see it's softening the edge between a hard pond, ledge and a crushed granite pathway. If you have arbors, if you have a lot of hard structures and you surround them with what I call stiff plants, then you get a really hard-looking garden. Adding some ornamental grasses, things that can move in the slight breeze, gives you movement in your garden. The same way butterflies, birds, anything that's creating movement gives that extra dimension to your garden. So think about some ornamental plants, and this is a really good one to choose. New Gold. There's a reason you see this lantana everywhere. It is a workhorse in our garden. It handles our heat. It handles, it's very drought tolerant once it's established. It gets to be about 2 feet high, but it can spread as much as 4 feet. So you get a lot of bang for your one plant. And if you plant, which we always recommend in threes, if you plant in odd numbers, then it doesn't take very many of these to fill a really large space. It blooms from spring all the way until frost. So it's a constant bloomer, and unlike a lot of lantanas, this one is self-sterile. What that means is you don't have to go in and cut the old flowers off in order to keep it blooming. It's not going to try to stop blooming and set seed. It's just it drops a flower, it starts producing that next bloom. So you should have good continuous color for all of that time. It is somewhat deer tolerant. I say that with a grain of salt because deer can't read, and when they're hungry, they're hungry. Here it is shown. It's a good either front of the border for very large plants behind or a mid-border plant if you've got some tiny things. This is some wine cup in front of it that blooms in the spring, and in the back that's indigo spires that's just had its spring blooms cut back so that it's ready to come back for the summer blooms. Question?
How long do these last? We've been in our house for 20 years, and that little garden has bloomed every year, but now it's starting to look tired.
So it may be, at 20 years, that plant may be approaching its lifespan. I don't have the data on it. The other things, she's had this Lantana in for 20 years. Plants do have a lifespan. They don't last forever. They don't live forever. And so if it's still getting full sun, if it's still getting the same amount of water, you're still fertilizing in the same patterns, but they are declining, it may be time for you to consider replacing them. They don't come back from seed. They don't set seed. Trailing lantanas. These are good workhorses. They are one of the best traits about them. They're resistant to lantana lace bugs, which can sometimes cause problems for your other lantanas. They have a nice big spread of 4 feet around, 4 square feet, and only about a foot tall. So they make a really good front of the border. And their trailing habit means that they're really good for putting by that retaining wall and letting it spill over or down a bank. Or if you have a large pot, you can even use these as the spiller element in a mixed container garden. So good workhorse. And they come in both a purple variety and a white variety. Easy to find. Every nursery seems to carry these.
Those ones for shade?
They are for sun. Lantanas do best sun, although we'll give that a little bit of adjustment. In our Texas climate, anything will benefit from a little afternoon shade. But to get good blooms, you're going to need to have at least 6 to 8 hours of full sun. And they'll handle the heat. Mine is growing in a wedge between my driveway and a walkway. There's a lot of reflected heat as well as being, no shade. And it just blooms up a storm. Turkscap. This is a love it or hate it kind of a plant. How many of you love it? How many of you hate it? How many of you really just don't care one way or the other? A few. The reason I think we have such a love-hate relationship with this plant is going to be based on where you planted it. So this is a really good plant for me to explain that when the tag at the nursery says grows in the sun or the shade, it does not behave the same way. You don't get the same look when it's growing in the full sun as when it's growing in the full shade. For example, I have these in my yard in 3 different areas. One is in the front yard, full blazing sun. Full blazing sun. And it is covered in little red turban shape. The hummingbirds love it, but the leaves look like they're just gonna die. I mean, oh my gosh, that is the most pitiful looking thing. So I'm pleased because it's not right up close. It's kind of back in the distance. So I get to see the red, I get to see the hummingbirds, but the green just kind of looks green. If it was right in my face, I would hate it. Because, when you walk out there, it's just doing this. I have some in the deep shade, dappled shade. And it's a beautiful green plant. The leaves are just well formed. It's upright even in the hot afternoon because it's getting shade. And it's got a couple of blooms on it. It's got a nod towards blooming. Third place I have it is on the side of the house where it gets morning sun, afternoon shade. That is the sweet spot for Turkscap. Morning sun, afternoon shade. There's enough sunlight that it blooms very well. Maybe it's not solid red like my one that's out in the full sun, but the leaves look good. And only in the most severe 100-degree temperatures on the off-watering days might I need to give it a little supplemental water, or just know that the next morning it's going to have its leaves back up and look good. So that's the sweet spot for Turkscap. Morning sun, afternoon shade, but it will survive in both conditions. And if you have a shade garden and you're looking for something, it does put on a few blooms, and it is a pretty plant, especially if you go for something like Fiesta, where it is it's a variegated leaf in greens and yellows, and it'll have a couple of purple red blooms. Or if you like a softer pastel garden, there's a variety called Pampurier, and it has pink blooms. Plumbago, again, another workhorse. That's why we use it all over San Antonio. It prefers full to partial sun. If it gets in too much shade, then it does not bloom and perform near as well. So it looks, because of the soft blue color, it looks like something that should be in the shade. It's not. It's a good workhorse for your sun garden. Disease and pest resistant, I would give it a couple of shearings through the year. Just kind of give it a haircut. It shapes it up, but it also cuts off those dead flower tips that have already flowered and encourages it to go back into rebloom quicker. So, give this one a haircut a couple of times a year. Mexican bush sage, Salvia leucanthus. This one you want for your fall garden. They're just starting to bloom right now. They are drought tolerant once established, and this one, knock on wood, is deer resistant. My test garden for deer resistant is my mother's garden in Fair Oaks, where they have not a deer problem, but a deer infestation. They have two types of deer. They have the native whitetail and the axis. And what the whitetail doesn't eat, the axis does. Both types are leaving this alone. It will grow in light shade. It won't bloom for you, but it is a plant that will grow if you're looking for something with a different kind of leaf. Question in the back. No, we'll talk about that one in a minute. This one is fabulous. It makes a nice, almost rounded, mounding kind of shape, and then puts the spires of plants. The standard is a purple and white combination, but there is a selection called Santa Barbara. I like that one because it's a solid purple, which gives you an even bigger purple impact. It's also a little shorter. So Santa Barbara's about 3 feet tall, 4 feet wide, while the standard's about 4 feet tall, and so tends to be a little more open. This will be a little shorter and a little more compact looking, and has the solid purple on it. Here's a picture of the standard variety. You can see it's about 4 feet tall, little white going in with the purple. Just an outstanding fall color plant. Okay. So Henry Dolberg. Notice the names on the headstones. Notice the plant next to it. So the story goes in the lore of Texas, tradition. Greg Grant, who is a nationally, if not world-renowned horticulturist who happens to be from Texas, stomping around the cemetery. I have no idea why he was in the cemetery, but he noticed this plant next to this headstone. And he said, that looks like, the mealy cup blue sage, which is Salvia farinaceae. It's one of our natives, but it's bigger. And the blooms are bigger and bluer. And so he actually took this plant. It was naturally occurring. They found it here, and he got it started into the nursery trade so that it is now grown regularly for us. It is a tough, blue salvia, true blue salvia. It gets to be about 3 feet tall. With its blooms, there's a white variety that's available. The blue one he named Henry Dolberg, and the white one Augusta Dolberg. So this is Henry and Augusta Dolberg. It is one of the best salvias for here in Bexar County. The only problem that we've had with it is in the early spring, if you've heavily fertilized and all that new growth is just succulent, then you can have aphids. I just go in and I give mine a haircut. Clip those little puppies, put them in the trash can, send them off to the landfill. Don't put them in your compost pile, they're bugs. And then by the time they've regrown that foliage, the aphids have moved on. They're at a different cycle, and so you don't have. That's one way of taking care of aphids. Otherwise, there are products available that will handle the soft body insects very well. Just read and follow the directions. Other than that, I shear mine a couple of times a year, and it blooms for me from late spring all the way until the frost knocks it back. Mystic Spires Blue. Now this is this plant over here. It looks just like the Henry Dolberg, but that's about how big it gets. This one's been in a pot. Plants aren't really happy in pots. Perennial that want to be in the garden are not really happy in pots. So this one's looking a little leggy. They get to be about 18 inches tall, so they make a good front of the border plant. They handle full sun. They like a little afternoon shade, but they don't have to have it. And they bloom continuously until the frost knocks them back. Again, just like the Henry Dolberg, I'd give them a haircut a couple of times during the year to shear off those blooms that have kind of gone gray, but plus a couple of inches of foliage that allows it to side branch and become a little more compact, more branching, more flowering, better looking plant. It goes, yes, it will kill in our mild winters, it won't necessarily take it all the way back to the ground, but I would, in the late winter, I would take it to the ground. I would just prune it to the ground. Most of your salvias are this way. Just shear them down, get all that, summer burned and winter burned foliage off, clean it up, and let them come back fresh. With the good root system they develop, it won't take them long in the spring to come up and take a presence in your garden. How many of you are familiar with yellow butterfly vine? Oh, this is fabulous. So many seasons of interest. The first time I saw this was actually in the winter, and there was a chain link fence, and this vine was growing on it, and there were all these little brown butterflies all along it. The seed pods look like butterflies. And people will clip them off. I've seen them spray painted and fixed into ornaments on Christmas trees. I've seen them done, in spring pastel colors and done on little, I guess they call them spring trees, little ornamental things. But they're fabulous. In the spring, this vine will get 10 to 15 feet tall, so it makes a nice presence, and it has these wonderful bright yellow blooms on it. And then by late summer, it's starting to form its seed pods, and they're this chartreuse green like you see in the picture here. And then as fall progresses and the seeds are maturing, then that pod goes from tan to finally brown in the winter, and then in the spring it puts on its new growth and you're off and running again. This is a wonderful plant. Disease and pest, pretty tolerant, disease, drought tolerant once established, and it does like the full sun. Tropical perennials, I break this out separate because it's broken out that way in the brochure that I gave you. But for us, these are just root hardy perennials. Here in Bexar County, the plants that I'm going to share with you either stay somewhat alive, but most of them I just cut to the ground in the late winter and let them come back fresh. Thor Alice. blooms from early summer until, again, we have the cooler temperatures and a frost or freeze, and then it kind of stops blooming. It gets 5 feet by 5 feet. I tell you this because you do not want to have to prune this. When it goes into bloom, it stays in bloom the entire season. And so if you have to prune it back to keep it in bounds, you lose weeks of color. This thing never has been out of bloom from early summer until, like I said, until the temperatures change. It's a great one. Here you can see it. It'll get 5 feet by 5 feet. It'll take a nice presence. I cut mine back about half every year and then let it kind of flush out again. That way it stays nice and compact, and full of flowers. Here it's been, that's purple trailing lantana planted in front of it. You can see where some of that trailing lantana has grown up and through the Thor Alice. But it's a really underused shrub that we have here in Bexar County. Gold Star Esperanza. So Esperanza, yellow bells, you see them all over. The variety called Gold Star was found by Greg Grant. Same guy trooping around in the cemetery. He found this one. And the reason he found it, and he found it in our area, in the Bexar County area, is that it goes into bloom earlier. A lot of Esperanzas, it's into the summer before we get the bloom, well into the summer. My Esperanza didn't go into bloom until early August this year. And so the Gold Star is the earliest of all the Esperanzas they trialed, and it's a little more compact, has a nicer presence in the garden. So ask for the Gold Star Esperanza. But know that all Esperanzas do very well for us here in Bexar County. It makes a good, because of its height, it can make a good semi-privacy fence, except when you cut it down, in late winter to let it come back. Mixed plantings. Its bright gold color does best with other deep hues. So mixing it with pastels, it's a jarring yellow. Mix it with your purples and your oranges and your reds, it just really shines. This is the Hamelia that I've been talking about on and off, also known as firebush. This is a hummingbird magnet. So if you're trying to bring those little beauties into your garden, you want one of these. Ends up about 4 feet tall, 4 feet wide, with a nice mounding shape. You never have to prune a Hamelia. The shape's pretty, it's disease and pest resistant. The one thing I will tell you is it doesn't wake up early. So when it's died back in the winter and you cut it back, late winter, early spring, it may still be several weeks before it starts to leaf out. Don't dig it up and throw it away thinking it's dead. If you need to, scratch the trunk down, close to the soil. If you see white, it's still alive. Give it time to come out. Once the soils really warm up, then the roots really push the growth, and it will come up, like I said, and do a 4-foot mound tall in that one growing season once it's got its roots established.
The yellow bells you said cut in half, and these, do you cut these down to the ground?
I cut these down to the ground in late winter. Esperanzas, I cut to the ground.
As well.
The Thor Alice, I just cut in half. Yeah. Esperanzas tend to bloom just on the tops. And so if your tops are getting bigger and bigger, then you've got these blooms up here with these naked stalks down below. And if you want that look, that's okay. It won't kill it. But if you'll prune them to the ground and let them come back with fresh foliage, then it's usually you're more happy with the way it looks in your garden.
And once established, it's literally water.
Yes.
My front yard's not getting water, and it's a pool.
So your Esperanzas. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Esperanzas, very drought tolerant once they're established. Very, very. So here's a mixture. You can see the Esperanzas in the back. You can see the firebush in the foreground. And in between, you see another Texas superstar, and that's Pride of Barbados. Oh, yeah. Oh, everybody goes, oh, yeah. Everybody, yeah. Great ferny looking foliage and these very exotic looking flowers in yellows and oranges. Very striking. They grow from seed true and grow very easily, so you can harvest a little, you know, here and there. I'm at time. Okay, I always have way too many plants. Go through your brochure, take a look at the wonderful plants that you have options to. All of these plants are in, are we all out? Oh, we are out? Okay, so you go to TexasSuperStar.com, and that brochure is there in full color with all the information. Yes, that book right there. And then they will be adding all the new Texas Superstars that are selected. Annuals, I want to point this one out, Mary Mums. Instead of buying pots of chrysanthemums for your house, buy a Mary Mum. It's what's known as a big blooming marigold. It's actually a marigold rather than a chrysanthemum. They last 2 to 3 times longer than the florist potted chrysanthemums in the fall. So you can find these at most nurseries. You can plant them if you want, but they make great fall pot plants or along pathways. Just a really good fall annual plant for us. Okay. And the final thing I'm going to throw at you is, if you want bluebonnets, fall is the time to plant them by seed. Get the seed, plant them out while it's the soils are warm, let them develop their plants. If you don't plant them in the fall, then your only recourse for getting them started is to buy plants, actual plants, transplants, in the spring to put them in your garden. But if you want to start them by seed, do it now. I want to thank you for coming today. Great questions. I'll hang around, you know, when the next group needs to get started. There's a little area right out here. I'll just step out there and I'll be glad to answer your questions. Thank you again for coming.
If you have any questions about gardening in general or this video specifically, please contact our Bexar County Master Gardener helpline. If you'd like more information about becoming a Bexar County Master Gardener, then please check out our website. If you'd like to know more about the Texas Master Gardener Association, then please check out our state's website.